everyone. I want to welcome you into this wonderful continuation of our learning about the book of Acts and early Pauline epistles. And today I just want to extend part of my introduction, especially I'm going to introduce the New Testament letters because it's very important before we even learn the letters. These epistles, in other words, we call them epistles. It's very important for us to just have an ABC of what these New Testament epistles or letters were like. One of the things that I'd like you to be familiar of is that as you go through the New Testament, you realize that 21 out of 27 books of the New Testament are falling under this genre of letters, or you may call them an epistle. So, 13 out of 21 letters are written by Paul. Paul is one of those prolific writers of the New Testament. And you notice that major part of the New Testament has been written by Paul, 13 out of 21. And also, you need to understand as we go through this introduction that letters were not a typical method of religious instruction among the Jews, but they were using different way of instruction. But this is a kind of method of religious instruction or of communication that was adopted by these New Testament writers and possibly and mostly from Greco-Roman way of writing. And this is something that you need to understand, and that's the reason New Testament letters resembled ancient letters in a general sense, and perhaps it adapted some of the way of writing from the ancient letters from the Greco-Roman tradition, way of life, and they used somehow that method that resembles that way. So in Greco-Roman word, as I've said, letters was a popular method of communication, unlike the ancient Near East world. And that's the reason you can see there's this kind of adaptability where in the ancient Near East world now, apostles, they start writing letters, which was most popular in Greco-Roman world, unlike the ancient Near East world. So this is very important that you understand this. So the typical, when you consider now, the typical Greco-Roman letter was composed of an address, greeting, a body, and a conclusion. So this is one of the way that you can understand and know that typical Greco-Roman letter writing. So this is something that I just wanted us to be aware. So when you talk about an epistle, or a letter is defined as a formal letter that is distinct from an ordinary correspondence due to its elevated vocabulary. Epistle had a public nature due to its didactic content. So it wasn't just a simple letter. So while the term epistle, it actually suggests a more literary form, and it's very essential that we can notice and see this difference between what we know as the New Testament epistles that included personal greetings and travel information. The New Testament epistles were a bit different, were primarily intended for public audience and often addressing specific communities or individuals, while it also had that broader implication. So different from just a letter that someone could just write, an official letter, but these New Testament letters was intended for public audience, and even those ones that were intended to reach out to individuals, but you could realize that it wasn't just it didn't aim primarily with the individual person or whatever, but it had that broad audience. So it's very important that you get to know this, so that as we read the New Testament epistles, you are familiar with all these that happen. And now let me share with you what were the purpose of the New Testament epistles. I've talked a bit about something, but for this moment, let me share with you some purpose of the New Testament letters, or epistles to call them. So the epistles, as I said, they were written for not just only one purpose, they had multiple purposes. And let me quickly share some of those. Well, the first purpose of the New Testament epistle was the impartation of theological knowledge, and that's the reason we say theological instruction. This is a simply impartation of theological knowledge. And a primary purpose of the epistle is to simply convey theological truth about Christian faith. They articulate core doctrines such as the nature of Christ, salvation, the role of the church. These are things that you see in the New Testament epistles. And for instance, Paul's letters often included a doctrinal section followed by a practical application, guiding readers on how to live in accordance with their beliefs. So part of it was to impart theological instruction. This is one. Well, the second purpose of the New Testament epistles is exhortation and encouragement. You need to understand, especially when you speak about moral exhortation and encouragement in the face of persecution or false teaching, because most of these letters were addressed to people who were facing challenges. Some were persecuted, some were facing challenges of false doctrines and false teachings, and so many epistles aimed to exhort the readers to live righteously and remain steadfast in their faith amidst the challenges that would come in their way, whether it's persecution or moral decay. So this is like an alternatory purpose, like when you read First Peter is aiming to encourage these believers who are facing persecution, that they may maintain their hope and integrity. And you may see it throughout several of these New Testament epistles, encouragement and exhortation. But another purpose of the New Testament epistles was to address, to just give practical instruction in Christian living, practical instruction in Christian living, that how this Christian should live a practical life. It doesn't end with the message that they've just received. Now, it's a kind of challenging them that they may live practically the message that they have already received, so that it may impact their life, it may transform them, and have them to be what God has intended them to be. But another purpose is spiritual nurturing of the readers, because these writers, they wanted to nurture these believers, that they may be strong in their faith, that their reception of the faith of their faith may be strengthened, and they may keep growing in their relationship with Christ. So this is very important. Another purpose was to address specific issues And this is very common that these letters frequently they address the specific problems that was within a community. It might be addressing a false teaching or an ethical dilemmas, or perhaps there's an interpersonal conflict. Like when you read Paul's letter to the Corinthians, you see Paul tackles a lot of issues like division, immorality, providing guidance on how to resolve such matters. So this is something that you see in some of the epistles addressing specific issues, and that's the reason you need to be very careful. Sometimes when you're reading the New Testament epistles, some people have ended up in making a wrong application because they fail to understand that perhaps the writer was addressing a specific issue that may not be 100% with the issues that we are facing today, but although we can still have something to apply in our today's life, but it may not be exactly because the issue that the writer was writing perhaps might be a specific issue that a particular individual or a particular church was facing. So you need to understand that, so that even when you do the application, you do it with caution. So that's very important. Well, another significant purpose of the New Testament epistles is to establish authority. You see, these authors, particularly the apostles, they write with a sense of authority, and oftentimes invoking their apostolic status so that it may make their teachings legitimate. You see, like when you read the epistle to Galatians, one of the very important thing that is obvious is that these writers, as they were writing the epistles, they were trying to relate and present something that is real, because there are false teachers who are trying to say, you are not Paul is not an apostle, and Paul is writing as a way of legitimizing and telling them, no, I'm not just a nobody who came from nowhere and trying to say anything, but I've been sent by Jesus Christ. I am an apostle. So this is very, very important that you understand this. But another theme, another purpose of the New Testament epistles was to a preservation of teachings. The epistles also function as a foundational document for the early church to preserve the teachings and the practices of the apostles that could be handed down to future generations. So their inclusion in the New Testament canon underscore their enduring relevance and authority within the Christian tradition. So these are very important things that you need to understand as you read the New Testament epistles. Have this in mind and understand what these apostles had in mind. Now, to end my presentation today, let me present to you some of the similarities that we have between the ancient letters and the New Testament letters. As you notice that letter writing was not the typical method of instruction in the ancient Near East. So you may see that there's a kind of resemblance, but there's also some kind of similarities. So let's look at this. First is about the length. The ancient letters were lengthy, while most of these were short in length. The ancient letters, they were just short, but the New Testament letters were lengthy, most are long with few exception. You see, this is one of those most notable differences is that length. When you compare like the private letters in the ancient world, they averaged around 87 words, while the public letters were longer, with notable examples like Cicero's letter uh, averaging about 295 words, and the long one had 995 words. When you compare it with with the New Testament letters, you'll be surprised because the shortest New Testament letters, that is Third John, contains 219 words. So even that shortest is longer than the long ancient letter, while the longest, like the letter to the Romans, has about 7,111 words, with an average of 2,141 words. So you see, this is the significant uh, difference between the uh, ancient letters and the New Testament letters. But the second difference that you can see is is uh, the ancient letters, mostly they were private and personal, while the New Testament letters were formal and theological, because these letters, like the ancient letters, they were writing to individuals. Most were private, but no New Testament letters that were intended to be private. Most of these were formal. They had big audience. They were sent to churches, even those that were addressed primarily to individuals, but they also were sent to the churches. So this is very important that you understand this and be aware of all of this. I hope I hope you are following me. Another thing you notice that the ancient letters were simple. They had a simple structure, but the New Testament letters, they had a complex structure, and this could be because of the message that they carried, or what the authors wanted to address and present. And that's the reason you could see even the structure of the New Testament letters were very diverse, because of what it carried, the salutation, the thanksgiving, the body, the message. You see, all of these made it, because it carried a theological and ethical teaching, and that's the reason it was complex in nature. But Angela letter also were straightforward and informal tone. It had informal tone, so you could just read it straightforward. You could understand what it is, because it was just a simple letter. But New Testament letters were not like that. They were complex in nature, and sophisticated rhetorical style. You see, some of the New Testament letters, they were using different method, parallelism, use of a chiasm. You see, so this could make all the complex nature, because they wanted to present their message even in their style of writing, and that's the reason you could see the complex nature of the letter. But also the solitary and the ancient letter were solitary and independent, as I already said. But the New Testament later, they used amanuensis, a scribe. You see, sometime a New Testament later, some people have tried to say, no, perhaps this letter was not written by this New Testament writer, because a scribe helped him. But one of the things that you need to understand about amanuensis is that although they were helping the writers, but they were not writing their own words. They were writing as instructed by the writer. And finally, the writer had that full authority, and they were the ones responsible in that writing. So this is very important that you understand this